Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm painting a Blood Raven Space Marine, which most of us know as the chapter featured in the Dawn of War video game. And today I'm going to paint this using a slightly different method than how I normally paint my Space Marines. So hopefully using this method you can quickly and easily paint up a whole army of Blood Ravens, ready for when Dawn of War 4 comes out. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. And first of all I'm coming in with Mephiston red. I'm going to use this to base coat all over the power armour to the miniature. This is going to take a couple of layers to build up to solid coverage all over the Space Marine. Work in a few thin layers, slowly building up the Mephiston red till we get a nice smooth, solid base coat all over the power armour to the Space Marine. Doesn't matter if I'm a little bit messy at this stage and get Mephiston red over other areas, as I'll be coming in later and painting over all of those areas with different colours. For now I just want to make sure that I coat all of the power armour to the Space Marine with a couple of layers of Mephiston red. Because I'm painting this in a slightly different method than usual, I'm going to want to make sure I really get this into all of the recesses to the power armour, so there's none of the black primer showing through. I've got a nice solid base coat of Mephiston red all over that power armour to the Space Marine. And after a couple of layers you can see I've got a nice solid base coat of Mephiston red. And now it's going to be time to apply a dry brush highlight. For this I'm using Kislev Flesh, which may seem a little bit bright, but trust in the process, and this is the perfect highlight for a great looking Blood Raven Space Marine. So I'm drying off the excess paint onto a paper towel here. Now I'm just testing to make sure I've got the right amount on my brush by using the shoulder pad. And now I'm going to dry brush this, focusing it onto all of the raised details on the power armour. This is going to be a very stark highlight, but don't worry, that's fine, because what I'm going to do in the next step is knock it back a bit. But for now I want that stark, bright highlight catching all of the raised surfaces to the Space Marine. So I really want to focus this onto the raised details, all of the edges of the panels to the power armour, details like that. By its nature though, dry brushing is a little bit messy. So you can see here on the knee pad, I'm getting a little bit of spillover. That's fine, it will just add to the effect when we apply our next steps and knock this dry brush back a little bit. But you want to be as neat as you can and try and focus this onto the sharpest edges of the power armour. Coming through in several passes, slowly building up that dry brush till we get a nice stark Kislev Flesh highlight all over the most raised details. So I normally do an edge highlight method on my models. I quite like the stark highlight effect that gives, but I know a lot of people don't like sharp and stark edge highlights. So this method will be great for people who prefer a more softer highlight. Obviously where this highlight goes onto the round and flat surfaces, we're going to get a more even, consistent highlight across the whole model rather than just the edges. But for now I'm just building up that Kislev Flesh onto the raised details, picking out all of those edges and giving myself a really stark highlight for which to work from. So it's much better to come through in several passes, slowly build it up, because it's easier to add more paint than it is to take it away. And after a few passes with the dry brush, you can see I've got a really messy highlight, caught on places I didn't want, but I have caught all of those raised details to the power armour with a stark edge highlight of Kislev Flesh. And now with some Camoborg Crimson, I'm going to shade all of the power armour. So what this shade is going to do is darken down that highlight, even out the tones to everything, as well as sinking into the recesses and giving me the shading to the Space Marine. So I'm coming in quite heavy with the Camoborg Crimson. I'm applying this all over the power armour to the Space Marine. Once it's dried, it's really going to knock back that bright edge highlight, which is why I came in a lot brighter than I normally would. And where parts of the dry brush have been caught on other rounded and flat panels, it's just going to add to that interest, give the effect of light catching on these areas, and give us overall a nice quickly shaded and highlighted Space Marine in much fewer steps than the normal edge highlight method. And after that shade has dried, you can see how it's really knocked back that edge highlight, darkened down the armour, and given quite a nice effect that once we apply some more details should really stand out. So now with some Corvus Black, I'm going to pick out all of the undersuit. Obviously, because I've shaded and highlighted that armour, I've got to be really neat here. Don't want to make any mistakes. So I'm just going to carefully pick out all of the sections of the undersuit with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. You can see I'm being really careful around that power armour. I'm also going to pick out any of the strapping details on the model. So he's got these ones here on his back, and catching these with some Corvus Black as well. I'm also going to paint the Aquila on his chest with Corvus Black. Being careful around the power armour, just making sure I pick out all of the details to the Aquila. This method is really quick for painting a lot of Space Marines because we've done a lot of the hard work. So now all I'm doing is picking out a few details. At this stage, I'm also picking out the outer part to the shoulder pads. I'm just picking out the trim here around the edges with some Corvus Black. We'll be painting the insides with another colour in a later step. So it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of this on the inside of the shoulder pad. It's easy to pick the trim out now, rather than trying to carefully do this once we've painted the insides. I'm also applying this all over the casing to the weapon as well. This will tidy up any parts we've accidentally caught with Mephiston Red, as well as giving a nice solid black colour all over the casing to the bolt rifle. And finally, I'm picking out the belt going around his waist as well, just catching this with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. And with the Corvus Black picked out, that is most of the details on this Space Marine picked out. There's only a few little bits left to catch, and the next of those is going to be the shoulder pads. For this, I'm coming in with Rawk Flesh first. This isn't the final colour I want the shoulder pads to be, but trying to paint a really light colour over the Mephiston Red isn't going to work. So I'm coming in, applying a couple of layers of Rawk Flesh just to get a much brighter base coat that I can paint over later. Obviously being careful around the black trim on the edges, just making sure I catch the inside of those shoulder pads with a couple of layers of Rawk Flesh. I'm keeping this nice and thin, got a nice smooth finish. You don't want any form of texture or anything like that on the shoulder pads. So keep painting nice and thin, and a couple of layers build up to a nice solid coat of Rawk Flesh. And with the Rawk Flesh applied, I brightened up the inside of the shoulder pads. So next, with some Ushabti bone, I can get the true colour I want on these shoulder pads. So once again, I'm keeping this nice and thin so I don't accidentally get any texture. I'm just going to apply a couple of layers of Ushabti bone all over the Rawk Flesh I just painted on the shoulder pads. We'll give that nice Blood Ravens shoulder pad colour at the end. You can get 3D printed Blood Raven shoulder pads if you want a better effect. Unfortunately, I don't have any. And with that Ushabti bone applied, that is the shoulder pads picked out, and there's only one final base coat left to apply. And that's going to be with some lead belcher. Just going to carefully pick out any of the metallic details. So it's going to be the muzzle to his bolt rifle, just carefully picking this out with a little bit of lead belcher, as well as details like the magazine housing, the magazine, the Aquila, any metallic details on the bolt rifle. I'm also picking these out with a couple of layers of lead belcher. And I'm going to pick out the vents on his backpack as well. So I'm catching these ones here down the bottom and the ones at the top, just catching these with a couple of layers of lead belcher till I get a nice solid base coat. And with the lead belcher applied, that is all of the base coats applied to this Space Marine. So the next step is just to shade these couple of areas we've just painted. So for this I'm using Nuln Oil. I'm just going to apply an all over shade to all the details we paint with Corvus Black and lead belcher. So it's the undersuit, the belt, the strapping, the vents. The Aquila and his gun. Just going to make sure I carefully apply an all over shade of Nuln Oil to these areas. Try not to get any of this accidentally over the power armour. Just make sure I catch all the areas we painted with Corvus Black and lead belcher with some Nuln Oil. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. And after those shades have dried, you can see I've added definition to those details. And where we've picked out those base coats, it's really made the armour pop and given our highlights a great looking effect. So now with some Metalmania Standard Grey, I'm going to highlight all of the details we painted with Corvus Black. So for the undersuit, I'm just carefully picking out the tops of the ridges to that undersuit with a really thin edge highlight of Metalmania Standard Grey. Obviously, if you are trying to avoid applying highlights entirely, rather than painting this with Corvus Black, you could have gone over it with a white colour and then use a contrast paint. But I prefer applying some select highlights where I can. So all the areas I painted with Corvus Black, I'm just applying a thin edge highlight of Metalmania Standard Grey. So to the top and the bottom of the belt, as you saw, I caught all the parts of the strapping. For the Aquila, I'm just picking out any of the most prominent race details. I'm going to pick out all the feathers with a really thin edge highlight of Metalmania Standard Grey. I'm going to apply a really thin edge highlight to the edge of the shoulder pad as well, just catching that very outside edge, using the side of my brush to get a nice sharp edge highlight on the trim to the shoulder pad. And I'm applying an edge highlight all around the casing to the bolt gun. Trying to keep my lines nice and thin. Just catching all of the edge to the casing of that bolt rifle with a thin edge highlight of Metalmania Standard Grey. So as this is a nice quick and easy method for painting a lot of models very quickly, I'm just applying a single edge highlight. I'm going to pick out a few more details in the next step, but this doesn't need to be a chunky highlight. I'm not coming in with another full edge highlight all the way through this. So it's just a thin edge highlight to all the parts of the gun. And with that highlight applied, you can see how it's really added some interest to all of those black details. So the next step is with some Dawnstone, just going to apply a secondary highlight to a few select places. So I'm just picking out the very tips of the feathers on the Aquila. Just applying a small spot of Dawnstone at the very tips. And at some of the sharpest points to the bolt rifle, I'm just applying a small spot of Dawnstone as well. So some of the corners, areas like that, just applying a small spot of Dawnstone. Just to give the impression of sharpness and add a little bit more interest to the bolt rifle. And with that Dawnstone applied, that is all of the black details highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to paint the eyes to the Space Marine. For the eyes, I'm coming in with Warpstone Glow first. I'm just going to carefully sink this into the recesses for the eye lenses, just applying a small spot of Warpstone Glow into each of the eye lenses on his helmet. This might take a couple of layers to get a solid green colour. And now with some moot green, I'm just going to apply a really thin line at the very bottom of each of the eye lenses. It's going to brighten up those eye lenses, give the impression of some light coming from them. So I'm just applying a really thin line of moot green on the bottom of each of the eye lenses. And finally, with some white scar, just going to apply a small spot in the very back corner of the eyes, just like lights reflecting in the back corner of the eye lenses. So I'm just applying this small spot right in the back corner. And that is the eyes painted on the Space Marine. The Space Marine's really coming together. Only a couple of things left to do. The next of those is with some Stormhost Silver. I'm going to highlight all of the details I paint with Lead Belcher. So I'm just applying a small edge highlight of Stormhost Silver to all the sharpest points of the bolt rifle, catching out any raised details, edges, corners, details like that. I'm just catching these with a small spot of Stormhost Silver. And I'm doing the same to the vents on the back of the backpack as well. Just catching out the very edges, all the corners, with a small edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. With the Stormhost Silver applied, you could leave the Space Marine here, but there's one final thing I'm going to do, just to give a bit more interest to those shoulder pads. So for this, I'm coming in with some Agrax Earthshade, and I'm just going to apply a really thin line of watered down Agrax Earthshade into the recess between the trim and the shoulder pad. Just going to add a little bit of contrast, a little line of detail, just tidy up that shoulder pad. And with that Agrax Earthshade applied, that is how to really quickly and easily paint a Blood Raven Space Marine. Ideal for any games of 40k you want in the Dawn of War style. So please let me know in the comments down below. Have you played Dawn of War, and are you looking forward to Dawn of War 4? Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!